All right, the United States finds itself in a place where we're attempting to support Ukraine and perform this proxy war against Vladimir Putin and Russia. We've got Israel dealing with Hamas and the Gaza invasion. We've also got China watching all of this, waiting to make moves on a global scale. I have a show favorite with me today, Colonel Douglas McGregor. Thank you, Colonel McGregor, for joining us again.
Sure.
So yesterday, an airplane with Israeli citizens arrived in Russia. The tarmac was infiltrated and swarmed with what I can only describe as Arab immigrants within Russia, chanting Allah Akbar as they admitted that they were there to hunt down and kill Jews. Russia's airport police and regular police had to make arrests and get the group under control. What are your thoughts on stories like this? Is this a Hamas group within Russia or just an anti-Israel group? And are you worried about how many Arabs have been driven out of the Middle East into Europe that could wake up and suddenly make attacks on the very towns that they are now residing in?
Well, let's start with the first part of this. The story that you just recited is false.
Okay.
The Russians told me, and I contacted my Russian sources, that that plane did not have any Israelis on it. In fact, the only person that got off that anybody looked at strangely was an Uzbek. And what you had was not an Arab group by any means at all. These are simply Turkic people who live in Dagestan.
Okay.
Americans know nothing about the region as usual. And you have various different types, Dagestanis, Chechens. There are a whole range of tribes that have become nations over the years. They are Turks or Turkic, depending upon which definition you want to use. Everybody effectively between the border with Mongolia's border with Kazakhstan all the way to Turkey speaks effectively the same language. And we call those people Tatars, Turkic, any number of different things. The one exception, of course, are the Tajiks. They speak a version of Persian. In other words, indistinguishable from modern Farsi. But everybody else speaks Turkic. That means that the people living in the Caucasus and Central Asia can all read and listen to Mr. Erdogan. That's very important because Mr. Erdogan sees himself as the de facto leader of Sunni Islam and also prides himself on being the leading voice for Turkic or Turkish people and culture in the world. This is one of the reasons that the Russians have managed the 40 million or so Muslim Turks and Tartars in their country very carefully. Russia normally has no difficulty whatsoever with this. But I suspect that they've been listening to Mr. Erdogan, and they went there enraged at what is happening in Gaza, and they're not unique. And I would not confuse the rage at what the Israelis are doing in Gaza with anti-Semitism. It's in the interest of Israelis to brand everything as anti-Semitism, but there are many places in the world where Jews are completely safe, and I would include most of Central Asia in that category. No one objects to Jews, but there are lots of objections to things the Israelis do. So that's another distinction that we don't bother to make in the press. And if you turn on the mainstream, nobody keeps you informed about anything.
Yeah. Okay. So you think that that was a false, like, feeder story through Western media?
I doubt it. I think it's just that these people have been following things through Russian media as well as Turkish media. As I said, if you listen to Mr. Erdogan's speeches, they're very, very inflammatory. They're very nationalistic, but nationalistic in a way that we would regard as internationalist, because he's speaking not just to 90 million, 80, 90 million Turks in Anatolia. He's speaking to another 100 million plus in Central Asia. And we need to understand that. Mr. Putin does, and that's why he manages his relations with Mr. Erdogan very carefully.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know many felt that Erdogan had betrayed his NATO roots in order to reestablish a pipeline from Russia through Turkey, because Turkey's lira was collapsing due to inflation. I think it had lost 80% of its value. And so they're just trying to get their society and their country back up and running. Of course, the Western media is saying Erdogan has betrayed NATO. We should, stop all military weapon sales to Turkey. But he's playing two different worlds, it seems.
NATO is a paper alliance. Let's not impute too much significance to it. It has too many members. It's totally ineffective and dysfunctional. The reason that Turkey was in NATO was because Greece was in NATO. And this was our effort after the Second World War to stop the outbreak of future wars in the Eastern Mediterranean. So we thought if we brought the Greeks and the Turks in, that would make it difficult for them to do that. The other reason was the Turks were always anti-communist. Kemal Ataturk was very anti-communist. And he was actually very pro-German and pro-Italian. In other words, we would say pro-fascist or pro-Nazi, but he was always an anti-communist. And so we had good relations with the Turks. If Hitler had managed his own defunct grand strategy a little bit better, he might have had the Turks for allies in the Second World War. And even now, the Turks and the Germans, although they have their disagreements on issues, tend to like each other a great deal. That's not necessarily the case with the Russians. And so Mr. Erdogan and Mr. Putin have struggled as well, because ultimately Turkey is not European. It's external to Europe. It is a Muslim state. It is a Turkish Muslim state. It is a Sunni Muslim state. Those are its roots. It has no roots in Europe or NATO. That's absurd. So if anything, we are seeing much of the world return to normalcy. Who are the two major powers in the Middle East over the last 5,000 years? Persia, and certainly then after Persia, I would say Turkey for the last 1,000. And the Turks have been a dominant force. They came out of Central Asia. They survived the Mongolian invasions. In other words, these are very powerful figures, powerful people, powerful culture. And they are Muslims. They're not all radical Muslims by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, Turkish Islam was on the whole fairly moderate compared with the Arabs. But we're dealing with a different set of circumstances because what's happening in Gaza is enraging the entire Muslim world. This is not just another war in the Middle East between Israel, Egypt, Syria, or southern Lebanon. This is a very different animal. This is a civilizational confrontation now. And that is due largely to Mr. Netanyahu and his government that has tried to transform this into a much larger fight.
Okay. Yeah, I want to hit that topic here in a minute. Another story that I wanted to get your thoughts on that I'm having a hard time reading between the lines is they're saying that Putin's health is going downhill quickly. This might be the reason that Russia needs to end the war. Close allies, anonymous allies within the Kremlin say his health is falling apart. He realizes he's been beaten and he's humiliated. Is this Western media propaganda, or are you hearing anything about Putin's health actually deteriorating?
No. I have a great deal of difficulty with this. Mr. Putin, I think, is 69. He looks awfully good for 69. Seems to be very healthy and dynamic. Now, is there something else going on that we don't know about? Perhaps there is, but we've been treated to these rumors of Putin's imminent demise now for about the last 3 or 4 years. So I suspect there's lots of wishful thinking in the West, which is misguided, by the way, because Putin is probably the single most well-informed person inside Russia about the West. He understands the West. He understands us. This is a man who's exercised extraordinary restraint. Just the other day, somebody said, well, you keep talking about the powerful Russian forces. If that's the case, why haven't they, run up to the river, cross the river, and march to Poland? I said, because that's not what Putin wants. Putin would like to end this war. He's sitting on territory right now that is historically Russian, with Russian-speaking populations. He's going to move and take Kharkov. He will take Odessa. Those things will occur in time. But he doesn't want a war with the West or with NATO or with anybody. He just wants to get those territories under his control, get the Russians in them inside Russia, and then prevent any further oppression of the Russian population or the Tartars or anybody else inside Ukraine. That's it. He would like to see Ukraine as a neutral state. He's certainly not going to sit there and put up one more time with what we did over the last 10 years or so in Ukraine. He's not going to allow Ukraine to become this fortress for American imperial influence and NATO influence. That's not what he wants. He doesn't want Russia living under threat, just as JFK didn't want us living under the threat of nuclear missile attack from Cuba. I mean, that's about it. So I think anybody that imputes anything else to the man is just lying. There's no appetite for war anywhere else. He wants to do business with everybody. So I think I would just be very cautious about those kinds of rumors. Okay. You know, and once you reach a certain age, once you hit 70, I would argue that after 70, every day is a gift. Yeah. I mean, you never know what's going to happen. But for a man who's been dying now for several years, he looks pretty good.
Yeah, we've had to deal with Mad Vlad. He's going crazy. We've heard Parkinson's. We've heard cancer. We've heard shaky hands, and he seems to just continue to move forward. But that was in the media today, and I try to not completely dismiss everything, but I try to take it with a grain of salt, and that's why I like to have guests like you come on. Alexander Lukashenko from Belarus is calling for this war to come to an end. He said this is going to be a long, drawn-out stalemate that will only result in more people dying. Do you think that there's any truth to what he's encouraging? Or, of course, the media is saying Lukashenko has finally flipped on Putin, but you and I both know that's not true.
No, Lukashenko is expressing a view that's widely held, I think, everywhere in Eastern Europe, but especially Russia and Belarus. First of all, he's only got 8 million people in his country. Belarus is remarkably small. But Lukashenko knows that the Ukrainians are dying by the bushel. We think that 50% of Ukraine's population has fled the country, is under Russian control now, or dead. People tell me that 500,000 Ukrainians have died. Now, during World War I, and we fought for 110 days during World War I, we sustained 318,000 casualties, and 110,000 Americans were killed. Literally, 1,000 died for every day that we fought in France. That's stunning, isn't it? Well, run the numbers. How long has Ukraine been at war with Russia? Started in February. We're still short of the 2-year mark. So if we say, what is it, 21 months or 20 months of warfare, 500,000 Ukrainians are dead. We're talking Ukrainian soldiers. So I'm not talking about civilians. And perhaps that many or more wounded, horribly wounded. We're talking about an army that is falling apart, where if you want to be evacuated by an ambulance to a reputable hospital, you have to bribe the ambulance driver and the people on the ambulance to take you there from the battlefield. You have soldiers that are kept in small groups of no more than 3 or 4 together and then sent in as replacements because they're afraid if they try to replace platoons and companies, they'll end up with a rebellion against the Ukrainian government. This war is over. But we won't let it die because the regime in Washington wants to maintain the fiction that there is something good happening in Kiev. There isn't. There's nothing there but corruption and criminality. That's the truth. The Ukrainians are dying for nothing, pointlessly, in a war that should never have been fought. That's the truth. We don't want to accept that in Washington. We have this notion, we have all sorts of false notions, that Russia is something very different from what it is, and Ukraine is something very different from what it is. Only a few people in Europe are willing to stand up and tell us the truth. But I think that too is changing. If you look at recent elections in Slovakia, I think there's a turn also in Poland that's begun, that's going to become more and more powerful. I think you're going to see in Germany a hard swing to the right, along with most of Scandinavia. Everyone is sick of this left of center suicidal leadership. And I hope at some point that Americans will wake up and figure out that's what we're dealing with too. So I would right now pay very little attention to anything that comes through the Western media. You're not going to get the truth that way, at least not until governments in Europe change and not until the one here changes.
Yeah. Okay. Secretary of Treasury Janet Yellen says that the United States is prepared and able to fund two wars at the same time. Is this true? Is this bluffing? Is she really just saying that Congress will do what Congress does and print more fake money?
Yes, I think that's the first impulse. But if you look at the U.S. Treasuries, the last Treasury market gathering where we tried to sell bonds failed miserably. Nobody wants to buy our bonds. Now, the Fed for a very long time has walked in and bought up bonds, but they can't really do that much longer, and they know that. You've also flooded the market with cash. And how much longer can you keep that up? I mean, these are all the questions that competent financial analysts like Alistair MacLeod in London, and I think Mohammed El Arian, they're all trying to answer these questions. They all know that we are staring into the financial abyss. So the notion that we could continue to finance two total wars, which is really what it boils down to, is absurd. It's nonsensical. But I think that this government has chosen implosion and destruction over embracing the truth and becoming rational. Any rational man would say, wait a minute, we can't do this. A rational man would pick up the phone and say, look, Bibi, you can't do what you're doing. We can't afford it. We're not going to support it. The same thing is true in Kiev. Make peace or get out. It's over. We can't afford it. That's where we're headed. Nobody wants to do that.
Yeah. Okay. Speaking of Israel and Netanyahu, the IDF in Israel announced that their ground invasion will be much slower than was originally proposed. I don't know if emotions are starting to cool or if they're just realizing Hamas is dug in deeper than they expected. Is going slow the right move? Because it seems like the world was pretty much gearing up to be against Israel, even though Israel was attacked, because they see Palestine as this small, landlocked country with no ability to defend itself, and it's 50% of its population are children.
Bear with me. In 1227, an English army was sent to Scotland by Edward I. The army met a Scottish force in the vicinity of a place called Stirling Bridge. Ultimately, the English army was destroyed, was defeated. It wasn't simply defeated. The Scots then proceeded to murder everybody in the organization. Very few people managed to get back to the border with England and escape with their lives. The hero of Scottish history, Sir William Wallace, got a hold of the commanders, the two leading knights who commanded the army, skinned them alive, killed them, but then skinned them alive before he did it, and then had belts that he wore for the rest of his life made from their hides. Now, why? Because Scotland and Scots had been subjected in the previous 100 years to horrific treatment by invading English forces. So they exploded with rage and anger, and the violence was outrageous, unbelievable. Today, we look at that and we're just shocked. How could you make a man your national hero that skins people alive and makes belts out of their hide? Well, let's fast forward to Israel. There is so much blood in the sand in that part of the world involving the Palestinian Arabs and Arabs in general, Muslims, and the Jews who live in Israel, that we can't begin to line it up and explain it. What you witnessed on the 7th of October was horrific, barbarous, and savage. And if I were an Israeli, I would react exactly as they have. But it shouldn't come as a surprise, because the people living in Gaza have been living in what some people term the largest open-air concentration camp in the world. Now, some of that is their fault, and some of it is the fault, frankly, of the Israelis and also of the Arab states in the region, because you have Arab states in the region with enormous quantities of money who could have always intervened to help the people in Gaza and find a way out, even if it meant relocating them. But the Arab states in the region didn't want to do that. They didn't want any of these people in their country, and they saw value in maintaining the Palestinian Arab in a terrible position because it represented a permanent threat and irritant to the Israelis. Now, the Israelis, in the meantime, could they have done things differently? Well, of course, but we don't know the whole story. We can't recount everything here. My point is that this is not something that suddenly happened that was never going to happen. This was inevitable. The circumstances changed, and it happened. The question is, what are you going to do about it? And the Israelis have decided that it's time for the people in Gaza to go away. This is not an exercise in counterinsurgency. The Israelis are not clearing and holding something. They are expelling or killing and then permanently removing whatever they find. And their view is, if you're there with Hamas, if you're in the vicinity of Hamas, you're an enemy. You're a combatant. You deserve to die. Now, we in the United States, as a general rule, do not support collective punishment, which is what we're talking about. We find that unacceptable, violating the so-called laws of war and humanity. But that's what's happening. And the Israelis, as a result, have provoked the entire Muslim world. I told a friend of mine, who actually, we've known each other for years. He's also an Israeli citizen. And he pointed out, he said, Douglas, we have managed something no one else in history has done. We have united the Sunni and the Shia. Well, he's right.
Yeah,
he's right. That's the problem. And never before have the Israelis had to face in direct combat Turks, Persians, and Arabs all together. That's where we're headed. That's why I wrote the piece I did in the American Conservative called Avoiding Armageddon. If something isn't done and the Israelis go into Gaza and continue these operations, not only will they face Hezbollah on the northern front, they're going to face the rest of the region. Egypt, Jordan, they have no interest in going to war, but they will have to do it. They will have to fight because these are Muslims, and they will be accused of heinous crimes if they stand by and watch their fellow Muslims be slaughtered. The same thing is true in Turkey with Mr. Erdogan. I'm sure you saw the 1.5 million people show up in Istanbul to cheer Mr. Erdogan, who called the Israeli state a war criminal state. People are genuinely enraged. This includes people that don't necessarily like Erdogan, just as many Israelis are now supporting Netanyahu who don't really like Netanyahu because they see no alternative to this. Now, here's the wild card. The wild card is us. And the Israelis have worked tirelessly to cultivate control of our government. Our government is signed up to support Israel unconditionally, which means we are being pulled into a major regional war. We are going to be pitted against the Turks, the Iranians, all the Sunni Arab states in the region, probably states in North Africa. This will probably have an impact on the Muslims in India and certainly Pakistan. I would be surprised if it didn't also have an impact on us in Malaysia and Indonesia. And what I continue to ask people is, what makes you think Israel will survive this? That's my concern. I support Israel. I've always supported its right to exist. I think Israel should exist. I don't want to see it destroyed. But they are in a position right now where they have created an alliance against them that, even with our help and assistance, may not work. In other words, they may not survive. They may not prevail. I think that would be a tragedy. So it's why I have said repeatedly, we have to save Israel from itself. We understand the anger and the emotion, but we have no leadership and we have no strategy. If someone were more rational in Washington, they would look at this and say, we've got to put the brakes on or Israel will be lost. And what we don't understand is that in 1973, which is the last major conflict the Israelis fought with Egypt and Syria, that part of the world was very different. Today, these countries contain millions, hundreds of millions of people who are much better educated than they were in 1973, who have better technology, particularly technology involving media, information exchange, unmanned systems, robotics. I go down an endless list. If you look at Iran, it has a brilliant air and space program, fine engineers that have done marvelous things with very little to build some of the best theater ballistic missiles in the world. I haven't even mentioned the unmanned systems in the form of the various drones. The Turks are similar, only the Turks have a long martial history. They're the most militant state in the region, one of the most militant populations in the world. Anyone who has dealt with the Turks knows this. Fighting the Turks is a fight to the finish. If they become involved, and I think they will, if this continues, I don't see how the Israelis survive it. And I know they have nuclear weapons, but people forget the Pakistanis have made it very clear that the Turks will be given nuclear warheads if they need it, primarily for the purpose of deterring Israel. Now, if that happens and the Israelis decide to use a nuclear weapon, we can only begin to imagine the consequences. And I would prefer that they didn't, but they have it, and they've always reserved the right to use it if they see fit. Where does this leave us? You know, on the one hand, we want to support Israel, but do you help a man that you love and care for commit suicide? I wouldn't.
Yeah.
I wouldn't allow a good friend to commit suicide. And if I were in power, I would not allow Netanyahu to lead this country on the path to suicide. And that's where I think they're headed. And it would be a tragedy for the world if that were to happen.
Yeah. This has been my concern. I've been texting with Larry Johnson, saying, you know, on October 7th, I was horrified. By the 8th, 9th, and 10th, I was worried Israel was going to wake up a whole bunch of past enemies that will join forces and collapse, almost like pushing a boulder up a hill and then it rolls back on you and crushes you. And so I've been grateful to see them slow things down, but I do worry that they're going to provoke something that they can't control and they can't defend themselves against, because at the end of the day, they're a vital nation. The technology, the medical that comes out of there is second to none. But they also have a lot of enemies. And like you say, there's so much blood in that sand for thousands of years. It's a ball of yarn that none of us can unravel in a podcast because it's so complicated.
Yeah, well, right now, Stephen, the Israelis are going to complete this mission. They're devoted to it. They're committed to it. I understand that. My fear is it will be the end of them. But no one should doubt that the Israeli Defense Force will do this. Now, in the meantime, as this war widens, which it will, and we become involved, because we will become involved if Hezbollah attacks, it's been made very clear in the press that we will go to the aid of Israel. In other words, we'll compensate for the Israeli presence in the West Bank, which is going to revolt, and its presence in Gaza. We'll compensate by sending aircraft, I'm sure, from the aircraft carriers and other locations in to help. The problem is that there are new technologies in the region now. You have the Russian S-400 and you have S-300s. You've got a lot of different air defense missions. We will not escape casualties. We will take casualties. You also have navies at sea that are a problem. We're looking at the 100+ ships that put on a performance for Erdogan on the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Turkish Republic just the other day. But the Turks have very fine submarines. Interestingly enough, they have the same submarines that the Israelis do that were built in Germany. Of course, the ones that the Germans built for the Israelis were built free of charge, but the Turks paid for these. And they're very deadly. These are diesel electric submarines that are very tough to track, very effective in shallow water. And, you know, by the standards of the United States Navy, the Eastern Mediterranean is a puddle. You know, our preferred areas of operation are the Atlantic and the Pacific. It's very difficult to take us on in the Pacific. If anybody tried to attack or invade us, we'd meet them in the mid-Pacific and they'd never get anywhere. This is different. You know, we're too close to too many land masses that could exact a price from us. So I don't know what happens to us, but it's not going to be cost-free. Let's put it that way. And then beyond that, we may not even succeed in our ultimate goal, which is to preserve and rescue Israel. That's the problem. And the secondary and tertiary effects, the downstream effects, whatever you want to call them, you close the Straits of Hormuz, you close the Suez Canal, you shut off all the oil, all the energy that comes out of that region. Now we say, well, we have energy. Well, that's true, but we have systematically undermined our own energy sector since Biden came to office. It's going to take us years to recover. You can't get people to provide the enormous investment that's required for drilling unless they see evidence that there's a long-term strategic payoff. In other words, that they'll survive. What they can't go through is making all of those investments, lose all that money when someone steps up and says, sorry, new Green Deal again, you're out. You know. So this is a problem in Europe. It's a problem in the United States. Now, you mentioned Europe earlier. The massive numbers of millions of people from the Middle East and Africa in particular, not exclusively, but largely from those areas that have poured into Europe, were never there for the purpose of, let us say, becoming Europeans.
Yeah.
That's all nonsense. In fact, Mr. Erdogan was very clear to the Turks living in Vienna that they had done more to advance the cause of Islam by coming and settling in Austria and Germany than they ever did with the Ottoman armies that once besieged Vienna the last time in 1683. They see themselves as conquering through reproduction. And these people are not friends of the civilization in which they currently reside. I cannot imagine this ending well in Europe. Either Europe defends itself and attacks this alien entity in its environment, or Europe ceases to exist. So for Europe, the existential threat is not external, it's inside. It's not Russia, never has been. It certainly isn't China. The existential threat to Western civilization on the European continent is living in Germany, living in France, living in Italy, living in Great Britain. So we'll see what they do. But if they're going to survive, they're not going to be able to tolerate it for very long. Now, of course, there are people that are saying, well, this is the spread of anti-Semitism. You look at these people in Chicago or somewhere else. But again, you've got to be careful. There isn't very much antipathy for Jews. There is antipathy for Israel because of what it's doing. And I don't think that's well understood. It's this whole policy of collective punishment that people are having difficulty supporting.
Yeah. Ugh, what a mess. Final question. Do you see this issue in the Middle East and Israel being more dangerous to global peace and stability than the Russia-Ukraine situation?
Oh, yes, because you have a rational actor in Moscow. There is no rational actor in Washington. That's the problem. You know, the rational actor is sitting in Moscow. He says, look, I don't want to kill Ukrainians. He never did. This is what people don't understand. The Russians look upon the Ukrainians as Orthodox Christian Slavs. Why should they kill Orthodox Christian Slavs? They felt they were left with no alternative. The Ukrainians, as a people, don't understand the extent to which they've been manipulated into this war. And Ukrainians are very fine people. They're nationalistic, they're committed, but they're also living in the past. They're mistaking Russia for the Soviet Union. It's not. They're mistaking Russia for communism. It's not. And that has helped fuel this horrible, pointless, destructive war. We've got to stop it. And I think the European governments that are going to come to power when they throw the current ones out will eventually do that. They'll contribute to an end to this. But here, as long as this regime in Washington is still in power, nothing will change. And we will be hounded into war in the Middle East for something that just doesn't make any sense, that ultimately will, I think, destroy Israel. So I don't see any sober analysis. And again, a lot of this is our ignorance and arrogance. Oh, you know, the Arabs, they can't do anything right. Who are they? Oh, the Turks, who are they? You know, the Iranians, who are they? I mean, we dismiss everyone who is different from ourselves. You know, we did that before the Second World War. We dismissed the Japanese out of hand. Even before we landed in Normandy, if you read the assessments that were written about the German army, they were fanciful. Oh, the Germans can't think. They have no initiative. Who the hell came up with this? You know, it was an army without any tactical air support that practically fought us to a standstill. You know, it took us months to overcome them. So it's ridiculous. You know, we are arrogant and we are ignorant, and we lack respect for other people's cultures and ways of life, because we continue to insist, if you're not like us, in other words, you don't adopt what we think is appropriate for you in terms of whatever we think democracy is, that word that is just abused all the time, then you're the enemy and you deserve the worst, which is ridiculous, absurd, never made any sense. And it doesn't make any sense today. But how do you persuade Americans to abandon this extreme arrogance that has been inculcated in us, particularly, I would argue, over the last 30 years? It's always been a problem, but it's gotten really out of hand now. I frankly don't believe that the average American, if he were asked on a ballot, do you support becoming a co-belligerent in a regional war in the Middle East, would say yes. I don't think so.
Yeah.
You know, there are limits. You know, Washington said no nation can be expected to move beyond the limits of its own interests. He was correct. We have been operating well beyond the limits of our interests, I would say, for the last 30 years, probably longer.
Yeah. Wow. Lots going on. Thank you, Colonel McGregor, for coming on and giving us your analysis and your feedback. Let's hope and pray that things don't get out of hand. But as you say, that there's no real good analysis out there that doesn't look more dangerous than what you and I have been covering the last year.
Well, I think everyone at the moment is driven exclusively by emotion. So there isn't a great deal of thinking. If anyone's thinking at all right now, unfortunately, I think it's in the opposite camp, in the region. They're thinking carefully about what steps they want to take and how they'll do it. We really haven't done that.
Wow. Well, thank you very much. I know you need to run. I appreciate your time. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.